Silver Sword, Chapter 16, Through the Russian Zone. "Take the Potsdam road and follow your noses," the family were told, and off they went, singing a gay song with their heads in the air. If they had gone due west toward Belgium, they might have travelled more quickly, for this was the general direction of the traffic. Fewer refugees were moving south, so lifts were scarce, and they were on their feet most of the time. They crossed the Elbe near Rosslau by a bridge that had not been too badly damaged for the Russians to repair. Here they were held up for half a day by a spearhead of the Russian army bound, so rumour had it, for Prague to drive the Germans out of Czechoslovakia. Never before had Ruth seen so many soldiers. First came the tanks to clear the way. Next, column after column of marching soldiers, tired and dirty in their ragged uniforms. They came from the Ukraine and the Tatar republics, from the Ural Mountains and the Caucasus, from the countries of the Baltic, from Siberia, Mongolia. Over the bridge they poured in their thousands, while everyone else stood by to let them pass. "I know that song," cried Bronya, as she caught a snatch of a Cossack song from a group of soldiers. "Father taught it to us. Do you remember?" "Yes, I remember," said Ruth. "It was the summer we spent by the Dunajec River. We were on a raft, floating downstream between the wooded peaks." She sighed, and the tune was lost in another burst of singing. Standing there, they heard many songs, some of them bright and jolly, some of them slow and poignantly sad. The family squeezed over the bridge behind the last of the marching columns. They were hardly across when screaming horns announced the arrival of the staff cars, mostly Mercedes and Hawks which had been taken from the Nazis. Next, cars with secretaries, cars with war booty, fur coats, textiles, carpets, looted china, lorries with furniture, radios, refrigerators, food lorries with tons and tons of Russian delicacies, caviar, sturgeon, vodka, Crimean wine, lorries bearing proud posters, "We welcome the liberating army." More marching columns, columns of women and girls in grey-green uniform with tight blouses and high boots. They had come to do the cooking and the washing, to help in the hospitals and look after the sick. Tagged on to them were clusters of small boys picked up from the woods and burnt-out villages. They had come because they were hungry, and the Red Army was ready to feed them. "The whole world's gone by today. Surely there can't be any more people left," said Bronya as the dust began to subside. But there was still the rearguard to come, and soon the dust was flying again under the wheels of hundreds of small light carts drawn by low Cossack horses. "Now for a lift," cried Jan as a grey old man, whip in hand, came rattling by in a cart with a canvas roof. And before Ruth could stop him, he had hauled himself up over the tailboard. "We'll never catch him up. The carts are all full," cried Ruth. But soon an open cart, with nothing in the back but a heap of straw, some fodder and a leg of smoked pork, picked the three of them up. It was an anxious ride, for the cart was travelling more slowly than Jan's, and what with the dust and the overtaking and the spreading out into fields on either side of the road, they quickly lost sight of Jan. Jan was perfectly happy. He had landed on a pile of straw as comfortable as a feather bed, beside a sick soldier and a pen with a squawking goose. And if it was not worth his while to make the acquaintance of the soldier, he thought quite differently about the goose. All afternoon, Ruth and Edek kept a lookout for Jan's cart. As it happened, their vigilance proved unnecessary, for the whole caravan halted at dusk to camp for the night. Fires were kindled, stock replenished from nearby farms, and there was eating and drinking and singing. Jan was quickly found and forgiven. The next day their ways parted, and the family cut across the country in the direction of Bitterfeld and Halle. Before they left Berlin, the British officer had provided them with ration cards, and with the money he had given them they were able to buy food. For recapturing the chimp, Jan had been rewarded with 100 marks. He entrusted this to Ruth and did not question how she chose to spend it. When at last the money ran out, they were dependent on what they could beg or work for. Work was difficult to find, for the factories were idle and farms had absorbed the first prisoners of war to be released. Some villages refused to admit them, having neither food nor shelter for any more refugees, but for the most part they met with kindness and were not refused food if it could be spared. Most big towns had their UNRWA food kitchens, and these were always welcome, but best of all were the transit camps. It was the time when camp commandants used to send soldiers round with guns to seize stores. They ransacked warehouses, factories, shops, even garrets and barns, for the peasants had hidden plenty away, and the slave workers that swelled the camps often knew the hiding places. One such camp had a Polish section where a school had been started. Had the family stayed here, and they were pressed to do so, they would have received all the food and schooling and medical attention that they needed. Edek was very tired when they arrived, and Ruth was ready to stay as long as he needed rest, but he recovered after a few days and was eager to be off. Whenever he was tempted to linger, one peep at the silver sword was enough to spur him on again. All day long the sun smiled down upon them, upon toilers in the field where the fresh crops were springing, upon towns littered with the debris of war, upon a people numbed by defeat, living from day to day with no thought for the future, upon women standing in bread queues or wheeling barrows of wood they had collected in the forest for their kitchen fires, upon wounded soldiers sitting on hospital balconies, basking in the sun's heat. Some of the soldiers waved to the family as they passed by, and the family waved back. So they came to the edge of the Russian zone. In the early days of peace, there were many places where it was not difficult to slip unobserved from one zone to the next. They crossed the frontier somewhere in the Thuringian forest without realising that they had done so, and it was only the unfamiliar uniforms of the soldiers and the strange language of the notices that told them they had now reached the American zone.